Hey everybody, I hope your day is going great. It's about to get better. Welcome to this episode of Sustainable Stace, where we're going to be in the garden looking at a underrated perennial herb. What is that? It is sage. I'm going to show you how to get it in and out of winter so it navigates the warm months as best and productively as possible, how to propagate it, and a really great idea I stumbled on of how to make the most of its flavor in the kitchen. Here we go.
I'm Stace. For me, healthy food and sustainability are totally connected. You can grow it yourself. Nature is generous.
Welcome to the garden. I'm in one of my little perennial beds. There's a whole host of beautiful flavors and smells and pollen around me. There's maple tree and hops, oregano and garlic scapes. There's little dwarf apple trees and comfrey. It's just a beautiful place to be. And this gorgeous little perennial is a sage plant. Now, sage can be, when it's mature, quite woody. And over time, if you don't prune it or care for it, it can have fewer and fewer leaves, more and more stems, and it's really the leaves that you want for the flavor in your dishes. And so there's got to be ways that you thoughtfully prune it, and most of all, cut it back in spring when it's about to emerge with fresh branches and growth so that you have new junctions, new stems, and new leaves. This is a multi-generational sage bush. I've had this for years, but I've propagated it recently, and I'll show you what's happened after 1 year to the baby plant that I propagated from it. We'll get to that in a little bit. Now you can see this is a very healthy plant. It's got a pile of leaves. The leaves that have the least color on them, that are kind of yellowish and faded, those are the ones that I would be least likely to take and use for flavor. Whereas the one that I showed you like at the beginning, that's kind of that beautiful, deep, dusty gray-green, that's the max flavor that you'd want to get from sage. It's a beautiful, flavorful herb. Now, I've used a term perennial. You might not be familiar with it. Perennial means that, unlike, say, lettuce in your garden, it keeps on growing. Lettuce would be an annual. You have to plant it every year. But a perennial is something you plant once, and if you care for it, like a tree, it doesn't die, it just keeps on producing and being beautiful. So this is a perennial herb, and wouldn't you agree with me that with the exception of maybe Thanksgiving turkey or Christmas stuffing, sage doesn't get a lot of attention in the kitchen, does it? But it's got an incredible mix of flavors that are like pine and citrus and a lot of earthy flavors that are beautiful, heavy, rich, warm. I think of them as comfort food flavors. I think of sage going with cured meats and sausages. I love putting it in stews, not just stuffings or dressings when I fill up a turkey at a celebration season. And it goes amazing to roast with like root veg, say something like parsnips. It's incredible to be baked into a squash dish as well. So sage has a great bandwidth of flavor, and I think it deserves more airtime, and that's why we're doing it today. So I'm going to just let you think about this as it's going into winter, because in a few months it'll be snowing and freezing here where I am on the west coast of Canada. What I would do is make sure that it's mulched in and protected. Anything that's dead I'm going to pluck off, so any leaves that aren't looking healthy or branches that aren't looking healthy like that, I'm going to take them away so that it's not going to need wasted solar panels out there when there are warm days. And I'm going to take mulch, usually something like this, you know, chopped up branches and sticks, and also some leaves. And I'm going to mulch around the plant to basically put a little blanket or a wrap around it so that it'll be warm and have as few severe effects from the cold temperatures in winter as possible. So mulching it going into fall and winter is critical in my mind for sage to do well, because the less well it does in the cold months, the more poorly it's going to do when spring hits. It's not really going to be ready to go. Then when I come into spring, I usually get a pail full, like 4 or 5 liters of compost, and I'd line right around the drip line of the whole bush with compost, and in that way it's got a great shot of beautiful new nutrition. Oh, this is Maxie. Hey, Max. And so maybe Max gives this plant a little bit of nutrition as well. So cutting back the dead stuff in late fall, early winter, getting some mulch around it before you go into the cold months, and then when you take off in spring, getting a bucket full of compost around it is critical. And at that point, I would cut back anything that looks dead or doesn't look like it weathered well through the winter, so it's ready to go. Now let's talk about propagating, and I'm going to show you how to propagate your own plant from a mature sage, and then I'll show you the baby that I made from this one a year ago. It's splendid, and then we'll talk about some tips in the kitchen. Okay, let's take a look at that. One of the things that many people don't know is how easy it is to propagate your own perennial herbs. I've got just a little pot with some good starting soil mix in it, and I've got a little bottle of some root stimulating hormone. It's a powder. I'll show you how to use it in a moment. And then I've just got a scissor. You could also use a pruning shear and a watering can. So I'm going to just go in on the plant and I'm going to snip off one branch. So here's what I've got to start with. You can see it there. And I'm going to start taking away anything on it that's at the bottom, completely taking it away. And I also want to top the top completely to stimulate growth at the bottom, because what you're going to want to do is get roots growing. And you'll see that I didn't take super mature old woody growth off the plant. I took quite new growth. And yes, you're right. It looks like there's no leaves left, but here it is. I've topped the top. I've taken off most of the leaves on the bottom. And now look at that. And then I'm going to do the next thing, which is really cool, is I'm going to take, and I'm with my tool just going to shave and expose that a little bit. And now it's ready to go. And then I'm going to take my root hormone here, which is a powder. And I'm just going to dip it right in there, dust it off. Got the root hormone on there now. And then I'm taking it and putting it in my pot of soil like that, compressing around it, and then of course getting some moisture on it right away. And when you've got that moisture on it, then you want to really compress it down, make sure that it's packed in well. You can put a lot of the wood underground that had the rooting hormone, and that's really all there is to it. You've now got a baby sage plant, and with time, with that moisture on it, if you keep it moist and the rooting hormone, that is going to spring up beautifully and create new life. Roots will form, and by spring, this will be ready to pop in the ground and start a brand new plant somewhere else on my property. Or a gorgeous gift for someone, say at Mother's Day or a birthday. Yeah, that's a good thing. Now I'm going to show you the plant that we got after 1 year. From doing this a year ago to now, what the plant looks like. It's absolutely drop dead amazing. As you guys can tell, I love to teach and lead people into success on growing veggies and herbs. On my channel, I've got lots of other resources, but I've done one thing that's really cool I want to let you know about. It's a year-long journey in a hyper micro garden. I called it getbackyardabundance.com, and if you check out that link at getbackyardabundance.com, I'll take you for a whole year through growing your own tiny garden that's super productive. Check it out. This is the plant that I propagated from the former plant I showed you at the start of this episode. This was just one little branch as a cutting a year ago, and from it we started out to root. We planted it here when it was a little baby plant. It has already massively surpassed its parent plant, and it's full of leaves that are gigantic, and it just smells like sage. It's such a beautiful place to visit in the garden. I love sage and rosemary. I like to rub it on. It's like the closest thing to cologne that I ever wear. It's beautiful. This little plant coming into spring was very tiny, and it didn't show a lot of promise. I cut back and cut off all the dead branches and connections, which is mostly what it looked like. There were very few little living leaves, and I gave it some compost around it, and it took off. And a few months later now into the growing season, it's already looking way healthier than its parent, so it's ready to propagate for others if I wish. Beautiful success. So I promised you earlier in the video that I would show you one little trick that I stumbled on in the kitchen that's been absolutely revolutionary for me on getting flavor of herbs into dishes, and I just want to show it to you with sage, because it's such a practical application. So I've got a whole bunch of these big, beautiful sage leaves off my bush, my 1-year-old bush. And chopping them up or snipping them up would be okay, but I've got another way that's just so cool. So I take a tiny little hand blender like this, you know, you push it down. I think of it as a weed eater in a cage. And then I pop all of my sage leaves into here, and then you just need something that's gonna get bounced around by the weed eater blades inside. And I'm just using, in this case, some rice. You could use oats, whatever it is that's not going to in any way deteriorate the quality of the dish that you're making. Let's say this is going into a stew or a soup or some roasting you're doing. Put back on that thing. Now watch this. Give it a little go. Here she goes. Shake, 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 shake. Okay, now watch this. Watch this. This is so cool. Now, when I dump it out, the rice and the sage is totally blended up into tiny little pieces. As long as it's something that's not going to be offensive in your dish. The rice is what I used in that case. Isn't that amazing? Now I've got these tiny little blended pieces of sage that's going to be permeating my whole dish, and I didn't have to do any work for it. So that's a gorgeous way to infuse the flavor of herbs with big leaves like that. It would work with rosemary, with thyme, with parsley, green onions. As long as you've got something like oats or a seed or rice that's dry and is going to move around from the blade, Really quick way to get the flavor in. Isn't that gorgeous? Yeah. Thank you for coming along for the ride on this little episode of Sustainable Stace about growing, propagating, and using sage in the kitchen. I've got quite a few more herb-related resources on my channel on things like oregano and thyme and rosemary. Check it out. Thanks a lot for coming along. And if you've been watching this on YouTube, guys, please check that notification bell there and choose to subscribe, and I'll keep on giving you more resources that are hopeful, helpful, and healthy. Till next time.